We have come to an end of this series that we just called Stories. And so I want to thank you all for sharing your stories. And how just a few weeks ago, we had a moment, a service, two services, where we asked you to come up and just share what is it God's been saying to you. Oh, BL kids, you're dismissed. They seem awfully loud in here than usual. I don't know what's going on. You're silly, Ethan. He's coming back. He's coming back. He's coming. Just get out of here. Do your job, Mike. What's that kid? And so I want to thank you for sharing your stories and what God has been doing in your life. And thank you for your vulnerability and your authenticity to share even when you don't have an answer. You're not really sure where God's at, but you just need help and you need prayer. Thank you for that honesty in sharing that. Today, we're going to start reading in the book of Exodus, specifically looking at the figure, the person of Moses. If you know Moses' story, it is pretty incredible. But we want to take our time and look through and see who is Moses and kind of what motivates him and where does God work in his life and how does God operate through him. I need some water, if you could, for me there, Jake. That's fine, just throw it. I'll catch it-ish. Okay, sorry. But before we can begin reading Exodus, let's catch us up. A few months ago, maybe more than a few months ago, we talked about the guy Joseph and talked about what his whole story, but we got to go back even a little further than that. So, long time ago in a land not too far away, maybe it's kind of far away, a guy named Abram, who was later called Abraham, is called out of his home, U-R, into the unknown, with a promise from God, I will make your nation great. I will make your descendants numerous beyond count. I will make you a powerful people, and you will be my people. And so they have a covenant, a promise amongst Abraham, his descendants, and between God. And so Abraham, through some misfortune on his own lack of wisdom, but eventually God gives him the promised child that he had told him would come. His name was Isaac. And Isaac becomes the keeper of the continuation of the promise. So from Abraham to Isaac. Isaac has two children, two sons, Esau and Jacob. And then God uses Jacob to continue that promise from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the patriarchs of the Hebrew faith, of the Israelite people. Jacob's other name that God gives him is also Israel. And so when you hear about Israel's children, that is a name of Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. One of those sons is Joseph. He is the favorite, the second to last born, the firstborn of Jacob's favorite wife. And Joseph is despised by his siblings. They take him, they sell him into slavery, where he ends up in a place called Egypt, a very fast-growing, powerful nation of that day. And Joseph, through the wisdom of God and through the hand of God, becomes the second most important person in Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh of the land. And it's through the wisdom of God and through Joseph's obedience that as a famine is coming and a 7-year famine is approaching and comes, it is through the provision and the wisdom of God that they are able to keep enough back to supply not only Egypt, but the surrounding area with food. And so people would come and buy food, making Egypt very, very, very wealthy. Some of those people who came looking for food just happened to be Joseph's family, who were hungry and starving, thinking their son dead. They approach Egypt to get some food. Long story made short is Joseph and his brothers are reconciled together. There's a reunion. The father, Jacob, is overjoyed knowing his son is alive. And Pharaoh invites his entire family to come to Egypt and live. And we'll keep you safe. You'll have food to last through this famine. And we love and cherish Joseph, and so now we love and cherish your family. And that land is called Goshen, where they settle. And they live there as the people of Israel, as the Hebrew people within Egypt's boundary, within their borders, for many, many years. and they grow and they multiply, if you will. Now, you have to understand that the people of Israel, the nation, they put a figurative boundary up around where they are staying. And figurative meaning they don't allow, as best as we can understand and know, the Egyptian culture to permeate into their culture. Remember, the people of Israel are a monotheistic, a one-God religion. And Egyptians are a many-God religion. And as most many-God religions go, they just grab more gods as they go along. And they meet new people and they conquer them. They just assimilate their gods into their stories. And so the people of Israel, they don't allow that to come into their faith. And so the people of Egyptian, you can imagine, are kind of thinking, why are you so much better than we are? Like, can our gods just get along? Like, we'll accept your gods, you accept, your God, you accept our gods, and we'll be one big happy family. But the people of Israel, they keep their faith, and they continue to look like the people of Israel. They're set apart, if you will. And when people appear to be exclusive, it's not very nice or friendly, right? We know in our culture it's very same. When people say there is but one truth, we say that's not very nice. My truth is right too, but by definition, truth is exclusive. There either is or there isn't. And so you can imagine some resentment coming in the hearts and minds of the people of Egypt as they look at these people they're growing and they're just so different, and they won't let us in. They won't marry their daughters with our daughters and our sons with their sons. That's backwards. Sons with our daughters and daughters with our sons, and it gets to be problematic. And so we enter the story years after Joseph is dead and the Pharaoh is dead, and the Pharaohs have come and gone, and now years later we enter into the book of Exodus, chapter 1, beginning with verse 8. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we are. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land." Do you hear what's happening here? A perceived threat. There's no fact here. It's just they're big and they're strong, and they might possibly. And so Pharaoh reacts out of fear. He reacts out of a perceived threat or perceived idea. He tells himself a story, he believes it, and he acts on it. We do the exact same thing. Simple example. You see me at Walmart, and I walk by you or walk near you, and I don't say hi to you. What do you think? That jerk pastor didn't even say hi. I'm not going. What kind of pastor does that, right? That's a reaction, right? Well, what if I just didn't see you? What if I'm just busy and I hate Walmart and I want to get in and get out? But you believe your story, and I do the same thing. And so this becomes my truth, and I react, and I actually, act with that truth in our mind being reality. Pharaoh does the exact same thing. He reacts out of fear, and you'll see this escalation as he continues to react out of the unknown and out of what isn't necessarily true. And so we continue reading in verse 11. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. You see what happened there? Initially, it's Pharaoh afraid, so they react by beating and making slaves of the people they're afraid of. Before a perceived threat, there's nothing happening in terms of like fighting or arguing, but now we've done something that we probably can assume the other people aren't going to like very much, made them slaves. Now they really actually might rebel against us. So they really actually might join the enemy and fight us. And so it escalates. Now, we had Pharaoh afraid, now we have the people afraid. So rather than saying, my bad, can we just rethink this process? They just escalated even more. So the response is to this, to be even harder. But the more, so verse 13, the Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks, and in all kinds of labor in the field. All the labors which they rigorously imposed on them. We escalated. And now even more so. If the Israelites were not thinking of fighting back, they probably are now. So now the threat is even more real than before we even started. This is how we do it. We escalate things to a place to where our perceived reality actually becomes reality. They weren't a threat, but now they probably actually are. And so in verse 15, we have another reaction. Now the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other was named Puah, and he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous. I love this. It's like underlying insult. They're not like your women. They're tough. They don't need us. And they give birth before we even get there. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty because the midwives feared God. He established households for them, and Pharaoh commanded all the people, all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive. Okay, so we escalate it. Now we're not going to just beat them. We want to kill all the boys. And I have to think through, like, this strategy seems weird to me because not only is he's killing the boys, he's killing his workforce, his future workforce, which tells you he must fear the Israelite people more than he values them as slaves. Because eventually he's going to run out of people to work, and the threat will be gone, but so will his workforce. Which tells you he has a much higher value in the fear that he has as opposed to the work that they're doing. And the midwives don't obey, which tells you something. If your leader, whether it's in your home or your church or your country, has you do immoral things, you should not obey them. Just for the record. It's okay to say no to people who are in charge of you when they're asking you to do immoral things. And so what we have is this escalation of killing the boys. They don't do it. So now it's every son who is born, same command, but he gives it not to the midwives, to his own people. So now you can't even walk down a street with your child. If you do, they'll take them and throw them into the Nile River and drown them. You have to understand this is happening in this day. This is taking place. And you don't read about it happening, but there are kids being killed in Egypt today, yes, but also in this book, in this point in history. Terrible, terrible thing to go through. Can't even imagine, don't want to, don't have to imagine too hard because it's not too far away from us. Maybe even in our own country. And so we enter, we zoom in from the general, the people, into the specific family. And we have this Levite man and Levite woman. And if you remember, Levi was one of the sons of Jacob, a brother of Joseph. And these two, which is it's important for the story later on, these two people, they get married, they have babies, and they have a son. And this son, it says, it was beautiful, because mothers aren't very biased at all. When she saw him, he was beautiful. And she hid him for 3 months. But you can't keep a baby quiet for very long, right? You know that. And so it got to the point where she couldn't keep the baby hidden anymore, and she has to have a plan. If she's seen in public with this child, they'll kill him. And so what does she do? She puts the baby in a basket that she's made, a wicker basket, and she waterproofs the basket, she covers it, and she puts it in the river. Now, I don't know about you. I have misunderstood this story for a very long time. I've read it many times. I've heard it read to me many times. I've seen movies about this part in the story. I've always pictured, and maybe I'm the only one, I've always pictured the mother putting the baby in the basket, you cover the basket, and setting it adrift down the river, and then walking away and just having a nice day. That's not what happens. She sets the baby in the reeds where it remains. It's not a matter of just, well, good luck, hope you find somebody. She puts it in a very specific place for a very specific reason. What happens? She places the baby. The sister of the baby goes at a distance and keeps an eye. There's no abandonment here. And then later on in the day, not much later I would assume, the Pharaoh's daughter approaches the Nile River to take a bath. She sees the basket. Go get the basket for me. Her attendants go get the basket. They open it up. The baby's crying. She has pity on him. The mother placed the baby here knowing full well people would come to bathe and they would see it. Did she know it'd be Pharaoh's daughter? I don't know. Very, very likely, possibly, probably. But she knew this child would not be here very long without being noticed. And she's trusting in his cuteness, I assume, to survive. So the Pharaoh's daughter sees the baby, has pity, and very soon after, the sister approaches Pharaoh's daughter and says, "Hey, I see you have a Hebrew child there," because she says, this one was Hebrew's child, right? "I see you got a Hebrew child there. I happen to know a woman who's had a baby not too long ago, and she has some milk. If you'd like, I can get her for you, and she can feed the baby." "Yeah, go get her." And so the sister of the baby goes to get the mother of the baby, bring her back to the baby, and take care of the baby. Not only does she get to raise the child for a while, the Pharaoh's daughter pays her a wage to do it. That's a win-win, right? So now she can walk around with this baby and say, "This is Pharaoh's daughter, back off. It's protected. It's safe." And so, pretty cool, right? Yeah. Ha-ha. And so years go by, and she raises the child for a time, but then as is the sad part of the story, she returns, she gives the baby to Pharaoh's daughter to raise. And so we have a very unique individual. Unlike anybody in his day, he is a Hebrew person, raised partially by Hebrew people, knowing and understanding about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He has that history told to him. He also was raised by Egyptians within the palace, getting the best education you could get in that day. Certainly being taught how to lead people. He has two identities. And as you'll see, I think, as is often the case among people of different descents, they're not accepted by either people. And so we begin reading in verse 11 of chapter 2. "Now it came about in those days when Moses had grown up, that he went out to his brethren," and look how he considers them brethren. This is the Hebrew people. He was raised as an Egyptian, yet he considers the Hebrew people as brethren. "And he looked on their hard labors, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren. So he looked this way and that. When he saw there was no one around, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So he commits murder, right? He kills this guy and he hides his body. He went out the next day, and behold, 2 Hebrews were fighting with each other. And he said to the offender, "Why are you striking your companion?" But he said, "Who made you a prince or a judge over us? Are you intending to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and said, "Surely the matter has become known." You get a pretty good sense early on in Moses' life who is kind of his character, but his personality. He has seemingly a very high justice value. He sees injustice, he feels this need, and he acts to fix it. He sees a guy beating another guy, he kills the beater. He kills the oppressor. He kills the slave owner, the slaver, if you will. He sees people not getting along, and he wants to fix it and make it work. And it happens over, and it's a part of who Moses is. It's how he's designed. And it's a beautiful thing when it's in a healthy place. I think Moses senses a piece of his destiny. I don't know that for sure. But he must know who he is. And I'm wondering if maybe in the palace of Egypt, the other kids growing up reminded him over and over again, "You're not really Egyptian. You don't look like us. You're one of those Hebrew slaves down there. You'll never be one of us." So he has an identity as an Egyptian, but he's reminded he's not really an Egyptian. He identifies more seemingly as being a Hebrew. And I just wonder if as he approaches and walks among his people, he wonders and thinks, "I can help fix this. I can help free my people. I can bring them out of this slavery. And, if there's a piece of this, I don't know, but maybe they'll love me, maybe they'll accept me. I don't know that that's true, but that's what's happening." And so he kills a guy, and then you can see him almost the next day walking around feeling like a hero. "I just saved that guy. I'm one of you." And he sees him not getting along, and he knows, he's been taught, if you don't get along as a people, you're never going to overcome the adversary. "Guys, why are you fighting? You're the same people. Can't you just get along?" And their response is to remind him who he is, or more so who he's not. "You're not really one of us. Who do you think you are? You're going to kill us like you killed that other guy?" And Moses gets afraid, and he runs away. The timing wasn't right. There's some things in Moses, I would tell you, that are keeping him from being that which God would like him to be. So Moses leaves, he runs away, he goes to this place of Midian. And Midian, if you know, is descended from Abraham, but not from Isaac or Jacob. He's a child after Isaac. And so we have a similar heritage, but different. And so he gets to Midian, he goes to this well, and these women approach the well to get some water for their flocks. And while they're there, these shepherds come and chase the women off. They're mean shepherds. And so Moses has a high justice value, reacts. And he runs off the shepherds and helps the women get water for their flocks. He sees an injustice, and he reacts and responds to it. They go back home, they go to their dad, Reuel, who's a priest of Midian, and they say, "Hey, this guy came out of nowhere and helped us with our sheep, our flock." And he's like, "Well, bring him here." They go get him, they bring him back, and they kind of honor him, and the priest gives Moses one of his daughters, Zipporah, as a wife. And they get married and they have a child. Now, if you know the story later on, you know what Moses' father-in-law's name is. And you've not heard it as being Reuel, you know it as being what? Jethro, right? So why the difference? Well, just for the sake of understanding, it's one of two things. It's either because the name Reuel, or the guy Reuel, has two names, which is not uncommon in that day, not uncommon for the Bible writers to tell people both names at different times. So same person, two different names, or the name Reuel can be a title referring to his priesthood. But it is the same guy, just so we're aware. And so and it says in verse 23, after he has this child and he's married now, he's a shepherd in this land of Midian for a while. And in verse 23, now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died. And the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out. And their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God saw the sons of Israel, and God took notice of them. Challenge. If you're someone, and listen, I believe the Bible is inspired. I believe it's true. Okay? It's also a narrative, and there's narrative language in there. It's important to understand that. If you're someone who says exactly how it's written is exactly how it's meant to be understood, you have to come to a realization, if that's true for you, that God forgot about his people here. He didn't know they were in oppression. And finally, he hears them and responds. I'm telling you, it's narrative language. What's being said here is the time is ripe, the plan is in motion, and God's going to respond now to what's happening. He's already been working in Moses' story. You just haven't seen it. There's some tension there that I want to encourage you with this. God knew the whole time his people were in oppression. No doubt. But it's now, in this next moment we're going to read about, that God directly intervenes and interferes and puts his plan in motion to get his people out of slavery. There's times in our life when we're wondering, God, where are you? And maybe God's waiting. I don't know what for. I'm not going to tell you why God does what he does. But there's times in the book of Exodus, especially as you're reading it, there's times you'll read something about God and it'll be a tension inside of you. That's something I don't understand. It isn't the God that I think that I knew about or know. I would challenge you with wrestle with that. That's good. You should wrestle with that. At the end of the day, my response to things that I don't understand when it comes to God is either I don't understand what I'm reading, or the reality is this: I trust that God is good, that God is just, that he is righteous, and he is love. And I'm not going to begin to tell him what he can and can't do. And I'm going to choose to believe and trust in him even when I don't understand or don't even agree with what he's doing. And so as you read the book of Exodus, I just want to encourage you with, you're going to hit those points where it describes God, or God does something that you feel like that is not how I understand God to be. I would challenge you with, you're probably reading it wrong, or God's a lot bigger than we are, and we don't get to understand all that God is. And God doesn't answer to us. Some hard truth there. But then as I'm thinking through this story and this narrative here, I begin wondering, it says 40 years that Moses is in Egypt being raised, from birth to 40. And then it's 40 years where he's in hiding in Midian. Why? So it's a long time to be in hiding. What's happening here? My challenge is this. I think, and this is Sam saying I think as he thinks, that God is working on and in Moses, transforming him into the person that he needs to be, that he can be used in the way that God needs to use him to bring the people of Israel out of slavery into the promised land. Look at how Moses responds. His value and justice is good, but sometimes his response to that is a little bit over the top. And you see that coming out later on. After the 40 years, he gets his people out of Egypt and he moves to the promised land. And you see him react and overreact sometimes because he's so frustrated. That value hits so high, he just does something, he overdoes it, and he gets punished. And you see it does not end well for him in terms of he never gets to see the land that God promised him. But I wonder how the story would read if right after he kills the Egyptian man, he takes the people of Israel out of slavery towards the promised land, I don't think they would have made it very far. Moses wasn't ready yet. Is that true? I don't know. That's how I feel about it. And if it's not true for Moses, it is definitely true for me. I dare say it's definitely true for you. There's things in your heart, there are things in your head and in your life that God didn't give you, and you picked it up and made it a part of you along the way, whether on accident, whether because of how you, whatever it looks, I don't know the why. There are things in Sam that God did not place there and doesn't want to be there. And there are times, if I had walked into ministry right out of college, I would have done some serious damage to a church. Because God had to work on me some more, to humble me, to speak to me, to work on me before I was even going to be ready to start ministry at all. And for me, because I'm so stupid, God made it very clear when that next step was to be taken. He used my wife to help me understand that, and He's made it very clear, this is the next step for you because now you're ready for the next step. I am so glad for that figurative 40 years where God has worked on me to make me ready for the next step. And the next step. And newsflash for you guys, I'm still in another 40 years because God's still working on me and transforming me into the next person He needs me to be to do what He wants me to do. I have picked up along the way a lot of baggage that doesn't belong to me. And God's saying, let me help you take it off. Moses had a lot of baggage, 2 identities, being raised as an Egyptian, around Egyptian culture. Do you think he could have walked right out of Egypt into the promised land, not brought some of that history with him, some of that culture with him? He had to go detox for a while. The question, the challenge for us is I have no doubt that you know at least one thing in your heart, in your life, that does not belong. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure that you do. And God is telling you, Sam, I didn't give that to you. Let me help you take it off. Not a matter of shame of how dare you. It's a matter of saying, let me help you. What I have for you is bigger and more than what you currently are. But these things are holding you back. Sam's pride, right? Thinking I know it all. I still struggle with that sometimes. He's humbled me over and over again. I tend to kind of forget the humility and go back to the pride sometimes. It's a constant battle of being humbled. What is it for you? I want to challenge you with write it down. Because you're going to think about it now and say, oh yeah, that's what it is. And then you're going to leave here and you're going to forget about it. I can remember sitting in seats like this, hearing a pastor and knowing full well what it was that was keeping me further from God. And I remember thinking back in my head, if I just wait long enough, the feeling would go away and I can keep doing what it is I'm doing. The whole time God's saying, I want so much more. Missing out. What is it? Write it down. Identify it. Number 2, begin praying right now. God, help me to remove this from who I am. Help me to move through it and away from it, closer to you and further from it. And number 3, tell someone. And your spouse does not count, though they should know, usually. Tell someone who can hold you accountable and remind you. When I'm doing something, someone's saying, Sam, what's motivating that? Is it because you want accolades or because God's calling you to do it? I don't like being challenged, but I'm glad I'm challenged. Who can you ask to hold you accountable to those things that you know God is reminding you and telling you they don't belong to you? We close in a song. We've talked so often about how identity is so huge in our life. And I have to be constantly reminded that I am not who I say that I am. I am not who you say that I am. I am a child of God because God said that I was. I forget that sometimes. I'm being working to prove something rather than working out of who God's already called me to be. I'm a slave. Israel, there we go. Can you hear me? Just working, stuck in the same place, missing what God has called me to. And you are too. Would you begin praying and have the courage to say, I know, I don't, first of all, I would pray this. God, I don't want it all at once. I can't handle all the brokenness and same all at once. Give me one thing at a time. Help me work on that one thing, and then the next, and then the next. And who are you going to tell about it? To help hold you accountable and help you, work through it. We aren't called to be alone. We aren't called to do it by ourselves. We're called to be in relationship with people who love God, who can help us work through these things that are broken inside of us. God wants to do it in you and through you, and He has great things in store for you. I would just challenge you to stop deciding what great means. When God does it, it's always great. Let's pray. Thank you, God, for who you are, and thank you for the love that you have for us, the love that you've shown for us. Help me, Father, to just see those things that are keeping me from the next step that you've called me to. May I not look at the 40 years in seclusion or, 40 years as punishment, but opportunity. To be made into the thing, the person that you want to make me into. And thank you for not just pausing the work that you have for us in the meantime. Use us now as you prepare us for tomorrow. Use us tomorrow as you prepare us for the next day. May we see your hand in our life and see your hand in the work that you're doing. Thank you, Father. Amen.